Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today's video, I'm going to show you how you can deploy your application to a VPS, a virtual private server. So I'm going to show you how to deploy a backend, a frontend, deploy a WordPress site and provision a database all on a VPS. So just to mention, the frontend and the backend use Docker. So Docker is being used for the deployment. So it will be good if you have a basic understanding of how Docker works. And if you don't, there will be a link in the description where I outline the basics of getting set up with Docker. So let's get into it. Firstly, we're going to get ourselves a VPS. And how do we do that? We are using AWS Lightsail. There are a lot of other options out there. AWS is price-wise compared to the other options out there. AWS is pretty expensive for getting a VPS. Well, we get the first 90 days free. Enough time to play around without getting charged. Okay, so firstly, we select the region. Currently in US is 20. The platform for this distribution is Linux. The operating system, Ubuntu. The latest version 24.04. Okay, then now next is setting up an SSH key. So I already have one already. If you don't, you can create a new one or upload, whatever works best for you. But I already have one, so I won't be doing any of that. The process is pretty straightforward. Network type dual stack, and I will be selecting this instance size. Okay. For the name of the VPS, you could name this anything you want. I would use my cool VPS. Now, create. Okay, so while this is being created, let's look at Dokploy. So Dokploy is what I would be using to manage the applications on the VPS. So it's an open source tool, and compared to the other alternatives out there, it's one of the best. Okay, so as you can see here, Dokploy checks all the boxes. And I would recommend it. An installation process is pretty straightforward. All you just need is one line of code, one command. Just need to run this command. I have Dokploy installed. This command also installs Docker and every other thing Dokploy needs. So you don't need to worry about the installation process. Okay, so here a list of supported Linux distros, some providers where you can get your VPS. Well, a surprise AWS came in recommended last. Very overpriced. But they have a very good free trial. So if you want to play around, you might want to look into that. But for long-term use, probably consider one of the cheaper alternatives. Okay, let's check back on our VPS. Okay, it's still pending. So at this point, enjoy the background music. Okay, our VPS is up and running. And to test that out, let's SSH into our instance. Okay, let me clear the screen. Yeah, that was when I was testing. Okay, so now let's SSH into our instance. So as I mentioned earlier, I already have my SSH key on my system already. Now SSH into our instance using the SSH key. Now copy the IP address. For the first time, we'll need to accept the fingerprints. And boom, we are in. So let's run a command. My Ubuntu ls. Okay, so congratulations, you have a Ubuntu VPS up and running. Congrats. Okay, now the next thing we're going to do is install Dokploy. But before we install Dokploy, we are going to open some few ports. So the first port we're going to open up is port 3000, and we would see why later on in this video. The next port we're going to open is port 443 or HTTPS traffic. Okay, once we have those two ports opened, we can go ahead and install Dokploy. So just paste in the command, but we have to run it as the root user. So we switch to root, and now we run the command. So while this installs, okay, now we have Dokploy installed successfully. Congrats. Now we can access the admin interface on the IP of our VPC or VPS on the port 3000. So that's the reason for opening port 3000 earlier in this video. Okay, this is up and running. I'll put in my email and my password. Okay, now we are in. We have created an admin account and we have access to the Dokploy interface. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to put this whole interface on a domain. So we're going to add a server domain. So I would put mine at DP. But before we do this, let's set up the DNS record first. Okay, so create a DNS record. So I'm using my personal domain, by the way, so that'll be DP for Dokploy. You can name this whatever you want, really. Paste in the IP info address, save the proxy. Just copy this. Now I would save this. Okay, once this is saved, you can come here, paste this in, email, or use my email, and the SSL certificate will be less encrypted. But before we save, I want to check that it would be a good idea if we check that the DNS has been fully propagated, so you don't have any issues generating the SSL. So I guess that is good now. Yeah, so I guess that's good. So we can save this. Okay, domain has been assigned. Now if we come over to DP, so voila, we have our sites, and it's on HTTPS secured. So that's also we can access it via HTTPS because we opened port 443 earlier to allow HTTPS traffic. So that was the reason for doing that. Okay, so at this point we no longer need this, and if you want, you could take out this port, so you won't be accessing it via the IP. You use your domain to access the admin console. So now we can log in. Email, password. Good, and we are in. So settings, we have here DP, that's our server domain. So next thing we're going to do, okay, before we go further, you can also configure your profile and change your avatar. You can direct a token to use within CLI. You can set up backups on S3. You can customize the appearance, dark theme. Yeah, I prefer light theme. Okay. Yeah, so there are other settings you could play around with. Notifications, you could set up notifications. You could add servers, manage multiple servers. But what we're going to do now is we're going to connect our GitHub accounts. I'm going to connect my GitHub down to password. So I'll create a GitHub app. Already taken. Now we have this created, then we install our repositories. Install and Dockerized. Now once this is done, next thing we can do is we can start creating, uploading our apps. So firstly, I'll create a project and let me call this Dokploy demo. So a project is basically a group of different applications. So it's a, can think of it basically as a grouping, we have grouping different services together. So now we can create our service. So this is our actual application. The first service I'm going to create is a WordPress site. Okay, so let's host our WordPress sites. Okay, so here there's already a lot of templates they have here already. Lots of different templates you could explore, play around with them. Well, I would be using WordPress. So we can create, confirm. So now we have our WordPress. But before we deploy, I also want to add a new domain, a record. So I'll add a wildcard or .dp. So it will be clear the reason for this very soon. So save this. Yeah. Okay, we have this added. So now let's deploy our WordPress sites. Just click deploy. So it uses Docker Compose. So it has everything set up, WordPress image and MySQL database. So we deploy with the default settings. And so we wait for the deployment to complete. As it's deploying, we could view the logs. But now we have our WordPress sites. Next thing we want to do now, let's add a domain to it. So by default, we have a default domain that comes along with our sites. We could also add a custom domain. So here I will be adding wp.dp.tonuolatbosu.com, and it will be on port 80 with HTTPS enabled. Okay, so now every time, so the reason for this wildcard domain I added earlier was that we could easily create new hosts without having to create new A records every time we want to add a new host name. So this way it's already mapped to our server IP because we're using a wildcard domain, so we could create as much subdomains on top of this subdomain as we want. So let's create this Okay, and it's also important to note that after adding a domain, you would have to redeploy your site so everything can get synced up properly. Okay, so once the deploy is being completed, we could access our domain. We can access our domain and we can see our sites over here. Okay, probably need to wait a while for the SSL to get provisioned. Let's wait a bit and let's try it now. Okay, voila. Our WordPress site is up and running. So very simple process. Come over here, create service, select the templates, search for WordPress. Once you have that, you deploy your sites, add a domain. Once you've added your domain, make sure to redeploy your sites. So now let's add a front-end application. So we'll be using Next.js. Create. Okay, so now we'll connect from using my GitHub accounts, and I'll select the repository. So it should be Next.js Dokploy Frontend. Yes, and the main branch. Okay, then the build path, you can select the custom build paths if you have the mono repo. So for the build type, I'll be making use of Docker, and the path to the Docker file is in the root directory. It's named Docker file. Okay, so yes, this is good to go. Now we save it. So once this is saved, we can deploy. Farm. You go to the logs, deployments, then new. Let's try that again. Right. Deployments. See all details for this deployment. What is happening? Okay. Oh. So I forgot to save this. Dokploy Frontend main game. Now save. So that is saved. Deploy. Okay. Now we have our deployments running. Okay. Now our deployment is done. Okay. Now, like before, we add a domain. The hosts Next.js.dp. That's wosu.com. The port is 3000. Enable HTTPS. Let's encrypt certificates. Then we create. Okay. We could open the terminal and see our container is running. So we could access bash and run whatever command you want to run. Okay, so we see Node version 18 is installed, and see here our container is running. We could run whatever we want inside our container. So see a list of processes. Can run Docker PS, see what we have. Okay, so you can see here we have WordPress, MySQL. That's for working with WordPress. Then it's our Next.js sites that we have running. We can look at the logs, Docker logs, straight3p. So we see here our Next.js app is running on port 3000. Awesome. Okay, so now we have our domain. Let's see what we have. So here, Next.js.dp.lol@posi.com, HTTPS enabled. So yeah, I just uploaded a dummy Next.js project to showcase the whole flow. You also look at monitoring here, CPU usage, memory usage, all that. You can have a look at what's going on here. So now let's deploy our Node.js backend. This will be Node.js. Create that. So it's still a similar process. We select our GitHub account, select a repository, select a branch, and remember to save. Next, our build type, we're using a Docker file, and the Docker file is in the base path. Then we also make sure to save this as well. And once that's saved, we can deploy. Okay, once the deployment is started, okay, perfect. That was very fast. Also, just to mention, the Node.js app I deployed needs an environment variable happening. So I will just call this hello Dokploy and save. Okay, that's been saved. Redeploy. Let's add a domain. Node.js.dp. So similar to how we did it earlier. Same process, but this is of what 4,000. That would be necessary. Create. Okay, let's confirm the ports 4,000 so we can check our running containers, the Docker PS. So we have here Docker demo Node.js. Okay, now let's take a look at the logs, Docker logs. 967. So you can see server listing on ports 4,000. Okay, so we got the ports right. Now let's redeploy this. Okay, so it shouldn't take long. Yeah. Let's access our sites. Voila, hello world from hello Dokploy. On our domain, it's HTTPS enabled. Working perfectly. So lastly, we're going to provision a database, and it would be good to mention that I would not recommend provisioning a production database because they just has the overhead of handling backups and all. So better to use a database service. I can provision database for small projects and if you want to play around, but for production apps, I would not recommend self-hosting your database. Yeah, so for this tutorial, we're using MongoDB. The name, let's call this my Mongo. Okay. Default user, let's call this Mongo1. Okay, password. Okay, so use the default Docker image Mongo6. Okay, now that we have that, we deploy. So while that's deploying, it's good to mention that you could also use compose files to deploy from your Docker compose files. And the process is quite similar. Just connect your GitHub account and specify the path to your compose file. So if you're working with Docker Compose or Docker Swarm, yeah, Dokploy has support for you. Okay, so back to Mongo. So now the deployment has been successful. So we can access, if we want to access it internally, this is the connection string we use. So access it externally, we need to specify different ports. Or we'd use 27,000. Save. Now we have our external posts. So I'll copy this, but before we can access this, we have to open port 27,000 on our VPS. So once we've opened the ports, we can now connect externally. Okay, new connection. Voila, we are in. So let's create a new database. My DB hello world create, and that's it. So we've been able to get ourselves a VPS, install Dokploy. We're able to deploy provision a Mongo database, deploy a Node.js site, deploy a Next.js site, and deploy a WordPress website. All very simple, very easy. Thank you for watching. Have an awesome day. Bye.